What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video. Today we're going to be going over the werewolf build. So the werewolf build itself pretty much has not changed all too much from previous patches. No new sets have come out that have really kind of fit the werewolf theme too much. Werewolves did see a small buff in the fact that one of their primary sets, Blood Moon, did see a small buff going into this patch cycle. But for the most part, werewolves are more or less where they have always been, as a sort of build that's very easy to learn and does pretty respectable DPS, but not really something that's going to be breaking any records, and not really something you're going to want to bring to higher and more difficult DLC trials. So again, not much has changed between last patch and this patch for werewolves outside of a small buff to Blood Moon, which will see a small increase in your overall DPS compared to last patch. So this build video, we will be going over gear because werewolf do have a few sets that do make sense, and I also do want to talk about a couple of gear options here, just because werewolf builds do have a little bit of kind of weirdness to it, just because of the way the werewolf form actually works. So I do want to talk about gear for a little bit. Then we'll go over skills, and then a 21 million parts so you guys get an idea of the rotation. The rotation is very simple. As you can imagine, pretty much nothing is really changed. It's the same 5 skills. It's the same sort of build, just with a little bit of a buff to one of our sets. So let's go ahead and get right into it with gear. So this is pretty much unchanged for the most part compared to last patch. The big thing here I'm going to talk about is going to be our primary weapon here. But the gear pretty much remains exactly the same as it used to be. So Molag, if you have access to the Imperial City DLC, specifically White Gold Tower, in order to get the Molag set. If you can't get the Molag set, then you're better off running Selene's, which comes from Selene's Web. Next we have Relequen. The perfect version here. You can get the imperfect version as well. It depends on whether you're able to clear Veteran Cloud Rest +1 or above for the armor pieces here. But this is definitely one of the strongest sets for single target DPS. If you want to do more AoE DPS, werewolves, first of all, are not really great for AoE DPS, so you really shouldn't be building around AoE. You should be building more around single target to kind of maximize your overall effectiveness. But if you wanted to get something that is a little bit more cleave friendly, a little bit more mobility friendly, just because Relequen does require you to pretty much stay on top of the boss here, you might want to run Lokkestiiz instead, which does come from Sunspire, so you can get Lokkestiiz instead. If you don't have access to either Lokkestiiz or Relequen, then your next best bet is going to be running New Moon Acolyte, which is a new crafted set from Southern Elsewhere. Because it's crafted, you don't necessarily need to craft it yourself. You can usually find someone to craft it for you as long as you provide materials, or you can just buy it off of guild traders. So those are the sets that I would probably recommend running first and foremost. So you want to run Relequen or Lokkestiiz. Those would be your top 2 choices, and then from there you can run pretty much any other standard stamina sets. New Moon Acolyte would probably be the set that I would recommend the most, though, just because you are getting the most use out of the weapon damage, and the cost increase doesn't really matter too much because you're on a werewolf build. You don't really have abilities that are going to cost too much. You're pretty much light attack spamming. Our second set is going to be Blood Moon, so this set does come from a DLC dungeon. Specifically, it comes from March of Sacrifices, so you will need to have access to the Wolf Hunter DLC in order to farm for this set. This is a medium armor set, so you can farm body pieces as well, so don't feel like you need to run this on vet or something. You can just run this on normal to get the armor pieces if you want to cover that. You can use other sets that I discuss in the stamina DPS gear video, so it's popping up in the upper right hand corner right around now, but Blood Moon is definitely going to be the most effective set here as a front bar set. One of the things with werewolf builds is the fact that you can't swap bars. You're pretty much stuck on one bar the whole time, so it doesn't really matter which set you run on the body or as weapons, as long as you have 2 full 5-piece sets, and obviously the Monster Helm set. Now, of course, this is assuming that you're trying to maintain werewolf form as long as you possibly can. In an actual raid environment, you might be dropping werewolf form every once in a while, depending on whether you're able to find enough adds to basically maintain your werewolf timer. So despite the fact that you're only on 1 bar in werewolf form, it is beneficial to remember that you will potentially be dropping out of werewolf form in possibly trash fights, or even on certain boss fights. And so you might instead want to run a different set instead of Blood Moon, like Lokkestiiz or Briarheart, something that you'll be able to use while you're in your human form and not lose too much effectiveness, because Blood Moon is not very effective compared to some other stamina sets as a front bar set when you're in human form. Now for weapons, you have two options. So the thing with werewolf form is that you do end up losing all weapon passives. However, you do maintain weapon enchants and weapon traits. You basically have two options here. You can either go with a two-handed, or you can go with a dual-wield build. The dual wield is going to be pretty much whatever you need to run, because again, you do lose weapon passives, so you're not getting any crit chance from daggers, you're not getting any bleeds from axes. So in that case, it doesn't really matter what type of weapons you choose. The most important thing is you maintain nirn on the main hand and you run sharpened on the offhand. If you're going two-handed instead, you would be running sharpened or precise, depending on your specific class and specific gear setup. So for example, if you're a necromancer and you are running New Moon Acolyte, you have some extra penetration there, so you might not need to run sharpened in order to get to the penetration cap. But in most classes, if you're running Blood Moon and Relequen or Lokkestiiz, you will need to run sharpened in order to get up to pen cap here. But regardless of whichever weapon you choose, you will be running double Ravage health poisons. They are stronger than enchants. And then your back bar should be either Master's or Maelstrom bow, just so that way you can still be effective while you're in human form. But it's kind of up to you whether you want to run either Master's or Maelstrom. Master's going to be a little bit better for single target. Maelstrom's going to be a little bit better for AoE damage. Both are very similar in DPS, so it's kind of up to you which bow you want to run. If you're in werewolf form, it won't really matter, but again, there are going to be some instances where you're not going to be in werewolf form, in which case you do want to be as effective as you possibly can in human form, so you will want to run either the Masters or the Maelstrom bow. So that pretty much covers a lot of the gear stuff. Traits and enchants, all divines, all max stamina enchants, all medium armor bonuses as well, because you still get armor passives, so you still get additional crit chance and weapon damage bonuses from wearing medium armor. And then for jewelry, all weapon damage enchants and all bloodthirsty. That's going to be the strongest combination here. And then I already talked about weapon traits and enchants, except we're obviously running poisons here. For your bow, you'll be running the infused with the weapon damage enchant. Again, this is more for when you're in human form rather than in werewolf form, because you're pretty much stuck on one bar here. Moving on to character sheet information, same kind of thing for pretty much all stamina DPS. Again, referred back to the stamina gear video. It should still be up in the corner, I think. If you click on the eye icon, it should drop down for you. But I am a Dark Elf here. You can be an Orc as well. If you want to be a Werewolf, just stick with those two races, just because there's no point in running in the stamina sustained races, because you don't really need to worry about sustain too much. You just want to maximize overall damage, so you do want to stick with either Dark Elf or Orcs for the additional weapon damage that both classes have. For attribute points, all points are going into stamina. We're running blue food here, so you can see we're sitting at 17,000 health. That's just because we don't have to worry about our sustain at all, because we are a Werewolf. Mundus Stone still going to be the Shadow, still strongest set there, and we are talking about blue food here for our max stats. Now in terms of class, it doesn't really matter which class this build is. It's class agnostic. Any class can run this build and be pretty much equally effective, mainly because we're losing a lot of passives. So the main passives that will be different are going to be your class passives. So from a strictly min-max standpoint, Templars are going to be the best, because you do get some additional weapon damage. So if you do want to min-max a Werewolf, you will want to run a Stamina Templar rather than a Sorc like I have here. But this is class agnostic, so it doesn't really matter which class you're on. For skills, we only have one set of skills to really run as a Werewolf. You only have 5 active skills and 1 ultimate. So your ultimate will be Werewolf Berserker. This will give you the bleed. Pack leader is not particularly great. The 2 direwolves don't do that much damage, so not particularly strong. So you will want to run Werewolf Berserker. For Pounce, I like the Feral Pounce to get some a little bit more out of your Werewolf transformation. So you will be able to basically last the entire boss fight in Werewolf form if you so choose. If you want some additional cleave damage, you can run Brutal Pounce instead. For Hircine's Bounty, you should be running Hircine's Fortitude, because you will be getting major brutality from weapon power potions. If you don't want to run weapon power potions, then you can run Hircine's Rage instead, but again, Hircine's Fortitude is going to be the better morph. You can run either morph of Roar, but Ferocious Roar is going to be better because you will be getting major fracture from the tank's taunt. So definitely Roar is great in AoE stuff because then you can apply fracture to a lot of things. But beyond that, Ferocious Roar is going to be better just because it also helps off balance uptime in trash fights. For piercing Howl, doesn't matter which morph you choose. Personally, Howl of Despair is going to be a little bit more beneficial to the group because of that Feeding Frenzy synergy. That it helps Lokkestiiz uptimes for people who are running Lokkestiiz. It helps Alkosh uptimes for tanks. And it provides just overall DPS bonus through the use of Empower. Howl of Agony, on the other hand, not really that great because bosses can't be feared. So you're not really getting any sort of additional damage with Howl of Agony. And then for Infectious Claws, Claws of Life is going to be more beneficial in PvE content. It does a little bit more damage and also has a heal, which is going to be more important in PvE content compared to the Major Defile that you get with Claws of Anguish. And obviously you have all your passives. So again, skills, pretty straightforward, pretty easy to go about doing that. For CPs, because we are a werewolf, we will have different blue CPs. Our green CPs are pretty much identical to what you would expect from any stamina DPS, so 100 Mooncalf. Then you could place your remaining points however you'd like. So 79 Tenacity, 31 Shadow Word, 31 Tumbling, 32 Warlord is what I have. But your blue CPs are going to be the big difference here. We have 35 into Physical Weapons Expert, that'll get us to the 20% jump point. 52 into Mastered Arms for the 19% jump point. 20 into Thaumaturge, 61 Precise Strikes, 38 into Piercing, 64 into Mighty. So we hit all of our jump points here. And we're getting our pen through Sharpened, so we don't need as many points into Piercing. So you will adjust Piercing depending on how much penetration you need. So if you need a little bit more, then obviously you'd shift some of these points down to hit the jump points and put them into Piercing. Red CPs, 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick Skin, 64 in a Hardy Elemental Defender for the balanced approach here. That pretty much covers it for build information. Now the rotation itself. So the rotation, again, very simple. You only have 5 active abilities, and the rest of the time you're just going to be light attacking. So not much really to talk about here. We will be using weapon power potions here. So the general rule of thumb is you just want to make sure to have the Claws of Life dodge going at all times. So every 10 seconds you should be using Claws of Life. And then Howl of Despair, I like to use it whenever you refresh Claws of Life. You should be hitting this at the very least every 20 seconds to provide the synergy. But more often is always better, just because only 3 people can activate the synergy at a time. So if you're grouped up with a bunch of DPS, you can activate it twice in order to get everybody the synergy option there. Beyond that, in an actual raid, you probably won't be using Roar too much, except perhaps in Trashfuls. Instead, Hircine Fortitude when you need to heal, and if you need to get your werewolf transformation timer up a little bit more, just run Feral Pounce. You do need to be able to pounce from at least 10 meters away, so you can't do it from right here, even though you could, you can actually pounce from point blank range if you'd like, but you won't get any additional timer, so you will need to back up around here, for example, in order to get the full timer, because you do need to stand that 10 meters away. So not much else to say here, except let's go ahead and get started with the parse. Now with the Blue Moon, once the proc activates, you're just going to want to keep on light attacking. So even if your dot drops when Blood Moon activates, and you will notice when it activates because you will start to glow red here. I'll see if I can point it out. But here, you can see Blood Moon activated, your light attacks are going stronger. You will not want to re-up your dots here. You will just want to keep the light attacking in order to make the most use out of the Blood Moon proc. So even if your dots are about to run out, if the proc happens, then don't worry about your dots. You just keep on light attacking. Because Blood Moon only affects your light attack damage, doesn't affect any other type of damage. So you want to make sure to be light attacking while the proc is active to make the most use out of the proc. Now if you're running Lokkestiiz, then you will obviously be picking up these shards. But we are not running Lokkestiiz, so we will not be picking up any shards, and so that is that. Now I am on a Sork, which does mean that our DPS at the beginning of this parse is going to be higher than our end of the parse, just because we still have our class passives. The Sorks do have Amplitude, which gives them higher damage done modifier, the higher the enemy's health is. So our parse is going to end up being a bit. You will see a drop in our overall parse once we get to lower health thresholds. See here, very simple, very straightforward parse. We're gonna slide attack weaving this whole time. Blood Moon's activated, so we won't re-up our dots yet. You will basically be getting Blood Moon on cooldown. Yep, there it is. We won't read our dot. You can see our DPS is slowly going down because of that sword passive. Again, if you want to min-max a werewolf build, you will want to go with Templars because they do get 6% additional weapon damage, which will end up moving your overall DPS. But again, any class can run a werewolf build. Templars will be the most effective, just by a little bit, not by too much. 6% weapon damage is not something to really turn your nose to, though. And we want to make sure to get all of our light attacks off before we do our dot. Very easy parse. Let's interchange. Once we get to execute, we still have the exact same 5 abilities, and none of them scale off of enemy's health. Towards the tail end of the parse here. Right, and there we have it. That is a werewolf parse. So we're sitting around 67k DPS or so, in this instance 67.3k. You can probably hit somewhere around 68 with this particular setup here. On a Stamplar, you probably would be able to hit a little bit higher, potentially up to 70k. But when you compare this build to some other stamina DPS builds on my channel, you'll notice that the DPS is quite clearly a little bit lower, and that's just because we're stuck with one bar, and werewolves have seen iterations of nerfs throughout the several patch cycles. But the rotation is very simple, and it does do quite a bit of damage. It's enough to get you into a lot of trial guilds. That being said, werewolves do have several weaknesses, one of them being the lack of cleave damage. So that in that regard, werewolves, you do want to keep that in mind, that werewolves are still not widely accepted across sort of endgame trials guilds. In addition, the DPS, while it is respectable for the complexity of the rotation or the lack of the complexity of the rotation, it's still not going to be enough to get you into vet DLC trials to some of them. So for example, VMAW, VHOF, you might be able to clear it with the Werewolf, but once you start getting into things like Asylum +1 or Cloudrest +1/+2, it's a little bit more difficult to get into groups that are running those because of that stigma that werewolves still hold, along with the fact that just werewolves just don't have a very good cleave damage, and in certain trials, cleave damage is just as important as single target damage. Of course, again, that single target damage is going to be lower compared to your more standard dual wield two-hand bow builds. But nonetheless, werewolves are a good sort of entryway into vet trials, those of you guys who want to get into vet trials. But while you can use this in vet trials, I do recommend still learning a type of standard dual wield bow or two-handed bow build, so that way when you are in human form, you're not going to drag down the group too much, and in addition, you will have an easier time transitioning into those dual wield two-handed builds for harder content. But that concludes this video. Hopefully you guys found this informative. Let me know down in the comment section below if you guys have any questions about the build itself. Hopefully you guys found this informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.